Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's presentation, video premiere, Belonging in the Wild, Yellowstone's Bison Story, is brought to you by Expedition Leader Sophie Mazowita, filmmaker Worth Baker, and video editor Andrew Christofil. Thank you all for being here today with us.
Thanks, Brooke. Great to be here.
Thanks, Brooke.
Awesome.
Glad to
All
be
right,
back.
everyone. Yes, so glad to have you back, AC. Everyone, here is Belonging in the Wild, Yellowstone's Bison Story.
When I think about Yellowstone being the first national park, part of me is just like, well, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't you protect this place? It's just so unique. It's hard to even fathom the amount of open space that we have here. It takes a day to drive across Yellowstone. It's forests, it's big open grasslands, geysers, bubbling hot water shooting off, tons and tons of animals that make use of that habitat. My favorite thing in the world is just sit there and take it all in for a day and watch the bison roam by. Just swept up in the majesty of this animal and the adrenaline rush of being on the landscape with that animal and knowing that they're so much larger than you and that they're just part of something that's so much bigger than any of us. They play such an important role in Yellowstone. And so we get this intense competition, massive herds, noisy herds roaming across the land. The males bellowing, the dropping of hooves and the strain of the animals, every muscle in their body tensed, eyes bulging out, and you can see the blood vessels in their eyes, fur flying, and yeah, it's wild. You know, that's really what makes you feel like you're on the American Serengeti. I think it's the closest thing to the experience of what it would have been like to be with these giant herds. People always assume that like, oh, you must have been born and raised in nature, like raised by wolves or something to like have developed this line of work. But I grew up in a city. I grew up in Ottawa, Canada, right smack in the middle of downtown. Had this vision that I would be a veterinarian and so would my husband, and then we would breed golden retrievers. And then I went camping for the first time at age 12. And that experience of camping at the edge of a lake in the pouring rain, listening to the call of loons and wolves howling for the first time, and I saw my first moose on that trip. But also just the aesthetics and the feeling of being out in a wilderness area that just flicked that switch and just everything changed for me. Goodbye, veterinarian, and you know, whatever I do, I want to work outside. Continuing to chase that feeling of expansiveness, in particular that connection with wildlife. And what's so cool about working at NatHab is that I feel like I'm now a roaming park naturalist. So I'm not working for the Park Service, but here I am getting to play that same role as the interpretive park ranger, just transplanted into a landscape that I've fallen in love with. There are just so many different species on this landscape. Of course, bison come to mind. Bison were nearly exterminated from this landscape. Yellowstone served as a refuge. There were about 23 bison left in this remote region of Yellowstone that served as a refuge for them called the Pelican Valley. So this is the one place in the world where American bison, this particular species, has existed in this state since prehistoric times. European colonists come in and discover what feels like an unlimited supply of bison, right, as far as the eye can see. You could just hear the thundering of their hooves, like the booming of an ocean or distant thunder rolling. We're impressed by the sound of maybe 1,000 bison that we can see within our view in the Lamar Valley, but just imagine a whole landscape full of them. They almost went the way of the passenger pigeon and so many others that, yeah, we just completely removed that also used to range in the millions. That's when people come in. There's this push to save this population. There's this history of 25 years of really intensive ranching of bison in Yellowstone. So it was the wild bison stock, and then some additional bison were brought in from Montana and Texas to help increase the genetic diversity of the Yellowstone bison population.
The buffalo would be extinct today if it had not been for our government and a few public-spirited men like Mr. Clark.
Bison management is one of the most complex issues surrounding Yellowstone. There is such a tension between the communities outside of this national park and here. Because say if bison range as far as the Paradise Valley north of Gardner, they're going to be coming into contact with cattle, and there's risk of spreading a disease called brucellosis, a bacterial disease that about half of the bison in the Yellowstone population carry. It gets a little bit tricky when you consider that cattle actually introduced brucellosis to bison. We created the problem, and bison are wrapped up in the mix of it, and it's just a question of how many bison can we tolerate on the landscape, and it totally depends who you ask. I think that we benefit from diversity on the landscape. Their pattern of grazing increases the productivity. There's more nutrients, there's more protein being produced on this landscape. It's something like 150% when the bison are grazing it, relative to just letting the grass grow. There's part of me that says yes, like let all the animals be where they would naturally be. I also appreciate having food on my table and the other uses that take place on the landscape. Bison are a success story, right? We went from 23, now we have over 5,000 bison. There's a message of hope there. If we can figure out how to manage our relationship with bison and all the tensions around it, yeah, there are lessons that we can take out elsewhere. All of those questions around land management and tolerance and our position relative to other species and how we can share the planet with other animals. And we maybe owe it to these animals and to these landscapes to think about how we can restore that relationship and be more in sync with the species that are native to here and try to find those creative solutions. Yellowstone is total magic, especially as a wildlife guide in this role that I feel like I have the best job in the world because I'm just doing exactly what I want to be doing. I'm in the position of getting to take 12 people into sharing that experience. And so when you have people who appreciate it as much as you do and get to connect, there's something so rewarding, especially in getting to initiate people into something that you love to do. There's also a sense of peace, a sense of belonging. And whatever emotional experience is happening, that kind of like tug, the feeling present, feeling alive in your senses, feeling like you're a part of this place. So you can capture that feeling, like it's easier to access that feeling here. And I always want to encourage people to take that home as well.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you, three of the masterminds of this film here, and cannot wait to learn more about it. So first, let's start with you, Sophie. So you talked a little bit about in the film that you had this big dream of being a veterinarian, and even your husband was going to be a veterinarian, and I love that story there. But when and why did you decide to become a guide? What is your story from that point on?
Yeah, yeah, I was such a planner, right? You can tell I had my whole future plotted out from a very young age. But once I decided I wanted to work outdoors, I was very fixated on working in the very first park that I had first camped in, Algonquin Park, Ontario. So this was, really close to where I used to spend summers with my cousins and grandparents. And got lucky. I mean, my hard work paid off, basically. I studied environmental sciences, got hired as an interpretive park ranger soon after graduating and spent several years doing that. And so in the film, I refer to working for NatHab kind of like being a roaming park naturalist, because that is a part of my my past that I did that for 4 years. I used to lead public wolf howl programs and take people on guided walks on all kinds of topics. But graduate school brought me to the United States. I left Canada to study in the field naturalist program at the University of Vermont, and so to get my master's degree. And it was soon after that I was working a series of outdoor education and place-based education jobs, but kind of missing the wilderness and those kinds of opportunities. And that's when 2 different NatHab guides contacted me in the space of 2 weeks, I think. One of them was my cousin, who I hadn't heard from in a really long time, Eleanor, and she reached out and said, "Hey, NatHab's looking for guides. Have you ever considered doing this?" I didn't even realize that she had that job. I knew she was a moss specialist, and that she was up north in Canada, but didn't realize that she'd been guiding Churchill trips for a long while. So she caught me up on what NatHab was all about. And then the next week, my friend Sean Beckett, who's another former Yellowstone guide, reached out. I knew him from grad school, and he said, "Hey, have you heard about this company?" And as soon as I learned about natural habitat adventures and the conservation values and just the ethos of this organization, I was totally hooked and sold on guiding.
Eleanor is your cousin?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, she's like Daily Dose royalty, pretty much. She comes on and gives like the best presentation.
Yeah, not surprised. Yeah, she's amazing.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Oh,
so I used to joke,
fantastic.
actually, especially because I did work a few polar bear seasons as well. I used to joke that I started guiding NatHab because I hadn't seen my cousin in a very long time. I wanted to be reunited with her.
Well, great. Well, so let's actually move to the bison story then, since that was the main theme of this fantastic film. And as we were talking before we got started, this was a huge, massive film that we somehow got down into 8 minutes in telling the bison story, but there's way more to it than just 8 minutes. Could you tell us a little bit more about the incredible recovery story about bison? How did it happen? And were there any special people along the way that made sure that we had bison today?
Yeah, I won't be able to give you specific names. I think it was a team effort by park managers and some of the early, let's say, custodians of Yellowstone. Obviously, there have been people on this landscape for a very long time, and the native tribes of this area do play a part in the bison recovery story, and a very big one in the present day. But in the early 1900s, population was almost decimated, right? I think I say approximately 23. It's kind of an odd number to say approximately, but that's the number that gets tossed around, about 24, 23. Maybe there was another one hiding out there in the Pelican Valley. So this like high elevation, remote part of Yellowstone. And they probably hung on there because they were so hard to find. And it was a pretty inhospitable, high elevation environment. So yeah, 1800s, 1900s, the millions of bison across North America, populations are decimated. 23 are hanging on as the last free roaming herd in the Yellowstone area. And the US Army, which is the predecessor of the Park Service, right? In 1902, the National Park Service didn't exist yet. It was the US Army that was present in the park and there to safeguard the wildlife populations. They took it upon themselves, or park managers decided to bring some of the bison from the Pelican Valley to basically start another northern herd, which is really the one that we spent a lot of time viewing in the Lamar Valley. So that's really the current day herd that features in this film. So they brought a few calves from the Pelican Valley up, and then they also brought some I think it was 18 pregnant females from a ranch in Montana, and then 3 males from Texas. So even though the population of bison in North America was almost rock bottom, there was all these captive bison. So that it was the free ranging population that had been reduced to almost nothing, and that was hanging on in Yellowstone. So we brought in some genetic diversity to reestablish this herd in the northern range. The Pelican Valley herd continued to grow. And we recovered this population with a lot of supplemental feeding initially. The bison were essentially ranched in the park. The Lamar Buffalo Ranch started in 1906. I think it was right through the 1950s that they were supplementally feeding and also culling bison. So it was a really different management relationship than the one we see today, which is really to maintain this herd of somewhere between 3,000 to 6,000 bison on the landscape and let them roam. Yeah, I mean, I could go on about the details of that, but essentially, with time, that population recovered, right? I think by the 1980s, there might have been something like 500 bison on the landscape, and then it, quickly ramped up from there to the point that we're now seeing them migrating out of the park, and that's what's led to some of the conflict that we also see with Yellowstone's bison herd.
Which is the perfect segue to my next question, was today. So there's a lot of tension and what other terms, I'll let you explain a little further about it. This complex story of coexistence when it comes to bison and Yellowstone, especially with the borders of Yellowstone. So what are these tensions? What is the land management and bison conservation, this like relationship between the two? So what's the story today?
Yeah, the story today is that we have, well, I think as of 2025, this past summer, there were about 5,300 bison in the park. And with a herd that size, the winter time, right, this time of year is really the crux for them. It's the hardest time for them to find food. And so when there are that many bison in Yellowstone, they migrate, right? That's their natural tendency. But the more of them concentrated in the park, probably, and then the more severe the winter, the more drive there's going to be to go down to lower elevations to try to seek out food. What's so incredible about the bison, if you ever have a chance to go visit Yellowstone in the winter and watch them feeding, is they're using their massive heads and shoulders to sweep through the snow, right? They're plowing through all these great snow depths, looking for forage underneath. And so it's just wild to see because they're these huge animals, right? You might have a big male who's 2,000 pounds and you're watching him move 2 or 3 feet of snow with his head to then pull up these dry grasses that look like they'd hardly give you the calories that it took to push that snow aside. So just, incredible animals. And the key really being that once the snow is 3 feet, 4 feet deep, the bison are starting to lose that energetic balance or that battle, right, to actually consume more calories than they're putting out, persisting in that environment. And so especially with the current herd size, great recovery story, but that means that there's slimmer food picking staying in Yellowstone. And so the animals end up migrating out. It might be something like a 70-mile distance, and naturally they want to move off of this high plateau, right? When you visit Yellowstone, you head up, right? You're always driving up to head into the park. And so the bison move down and they cross the park boundary. So that complex coexistence story really hinges on the fact that we have this really hard boundary between national park. We want the bison to be there and to roam free and to undergo all their natural behaviors, to then coming into contact with private lands, ranch lands, cattle herds. And the cattle are really the other key piece of this, because the bison carry a disease that they initially got from cattle called brucellosis. That all of the cattle owners, really want to avoid their herds getting. So it's kind of ironic that bison first got this disease from cattle, and now the concern is that they're going to give it back to cattle if they come into contact. But basically, when they come up on those private lands, they reach this really hard stop, kind of proverbial fence line, or sometimes literal fence lines, where bison are no longer welcome. And so, park managers, there's an interagency bison management group that puts their heads together, and we're talking about multiple like state and national and tribal representatives who are looking to find that kind of happy balance between allowing bison to move outside of Yellowstone, but then also letting them coexist alongside these other uses of the landscape.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And then switching gears a little bit and talking about your time in the park as a guide. Do you have any particular stories or moments that you've had with bison, or that you've seen a traveler have when you're watching bison in the beautiful landscape of Yellowstone?
So many moments. As guides, we rarely promise wildlife sightings on a trip, right? Like, yes, we're going on a polar bear trip, but like there's no promises. But bison are the one animal that I feel usually 100% confident in guaranteeing that we'll get to see on our trips because they are so numerous. And, depending on the time of year, you might be seeing small groups or you might be seeing big breeding herds because the numbers just increase and increase through the summer. So to the point that it's sometimes tricky to just pick out a favorite bison encounter. There have been so many, but I do remember that over the week that we were filming the footage for this film, we spent some time just parked at the side of the road in this spot called Little America, which is, in Yellowstone's northern range near the northeast entrance. And we had just gone into a little pull-up because there was a big herd with, some bellowing males right there in the peak of their breeding season with those bulging eyes that we were talking about and like all that testosterone coursing. And so you'll sometimes see this sparring behavior going on as these bison push each other around, right, for access to the receptive females. And I think there was a unique occurrence for me of actually seeing 3 bison bulls all spar, basically like all hit their heads together at the same time, like in this 3-way sparring event that I had never seen before. Normally it's just 2 at once. So that was pretty special and spectacular and awe-inspiring. But there's so many sweet moments with bison. It doesn't have to be those dramatic, battle to the death kind of feeling moments that can be so enchanting, right? Just watching the calves being playful around their mothers is another amazing experience. And you can watch basically calf zoomies, right? Where it's like they just rediscovered their legs and these little reddish colored calves are racing back and forth through the sagebrush. So yeah, there's just so many endearing moments with Yellowstone's bison.
Oh, how cute. So you brought up the actual film shoot, and I think that this is a great segue. What was it like for you being the star of this film? Like I'm sure Worth showed up with his big old camera. What was it like for you to be in front of the camera and tell your story?
Gosh, what a question. It was interesting. At first my thought was like, well, why me? Why not any of the other Yellowstone guides? And because everyone's fabulous, right? Every guide that I've worked with at NatHab is just wonderful. And so, yeah, it's, I wasn't necessarily camera shy, but it was interesting just to, have that aspect to the trip, following us around or having the cameras out. And what it really resulted in was incredible footage of the wildlife that we'd encountered, right? Like better than I was supplying as a guide to the guests. It was just amazing to see some of the video footage that came from the trip. And fortunately, there was a bit of added pressure as a guide, right, to come up with that wildlife footage. We came in knowing that we were telling a bison story and at the peak of the bison breeding season. So we felt pretty good about finding those filming opportunities. But again, there's never guarantees, right? But it was a really, really good week of wildlife viewing while we were there. And we had booked a couple of extra days, essentially, for Worth and I to be out gathering additional wildlife footage as needed at the end of the trip with the NatHab guests. And we hardly needed it. I think we had gotten so many great shots of bison and more. So it was really, the pressure was off. The wildlife delivered.
Oh, wow. Well, actually, we'll go ahead and move over to Worth. But I think that sounds like best case scenario for a filmmaker that is coming on to record just amazing scenes and also get Sophie in the field. But Worth, this is your first time on Daily Dose. So first, let's introduce you to everybody. Tell us more about your background and how you got into filmmaking.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Worth Baker. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I've been interested in sort of creative imagery really my whole life. As a kid, my family got like a mini DV cam when I was a 10-year-old, and I was always the nerd running around making little videos with my friends for school projects and stuff. So I've had I've been interested in photography for a long time as well. So I've been interested and passionate about visual creative work for a long time. But I actually was a software engineer for most of my career. I got out of college and moved to Boulder And yeah, I was, for the better part of a decade, I worked professionally as a software engineer. While I was learning to do that, I became best friends and roommates with a guy named Andrew Ackerman. Andrew has done a number of films and other videos with NatHab over the past decade. So while he was learning how to be a documentary filmmaker, I was learning how to be a software engineer. And we knew that we would work well together if ever we had the opportunity. We just didn't know what that would look like. And during COVID, I was excited to kind of inject some more creativity into my professional life. And Andrew was really excited to basically have a partner in his work. He was a solo, filmmaker, business owner for a long time. So back, I guess, this was like 5 years ago. We've been working together full time for 3 or 4 years now, and we own a small independent documentary production shop together. And we still work on software projects, but a lot of the work that we do is using the lenses behind me. So we do a lot of great and interesting work on our own and with NatHab, and it's a total joy.
Yeah, you are all over the world, literally filming for us. It's incredible. And honing in on this particular story, what was your mindset going into it? Like, how are you translating what you are capturing through the camera into also the story we just saw? What is that? How do you do that?
Great question. Yeah, we, as Sophie mentioned, I think, knew that we were going to try and focus on bison for this particular story. It seemed, going back, this was filmed in summer 2024. So we'd done pieces on wolves in the area, more in the winter time. We'd done a lot of video on brown bears and all these different places, but had not done anything in particular on sort of summer in Yellowstone. So we were excited to go down that road, and bison seemed like a pretty obvious species for us to focus on. So we knew, going into the shoot, that was going to be the primary focus of whatever the output of the shoot was. It was going to be in that direction. But what we never really understand is are the wildlife going to show up? Are they going to come hang out with us? And what's the story of the guide? How is that going to interact with the piece we want to tell? Because our overall philosophy of the kinds of stories that we like to tell with NatHab is not only focusing on just the species that are obviously immensely important to tell their story, but connecting it to a person's interests and their passion. And Sophie's just such an incredible person to be that messenger for bison. I think you can tell the story of a species in a somewhat academic way, and you'll capture the interest of some people, but focusing on an individual's interest and having them translate what they find so interesting about a species or a place or an ecosystem, we find to be the most effective way to go about it. So once I met Sophie and we talked a bit before the trip, and then on the trip itself with the guests, and then afterwards when we had some more dedicated time together, it was just really clear coming out of the trip, like Sophie's story is so neatly intertwined with not necessarily with like the decimation and recovery of bison, but really in her very evident interest and passion in interpreting wild landscapes for people. It's just so evident on a trip that she's on with guests, how adept she is at and interested in as she is and explaining and interpreting wild landscapes for people. So all that is to say, coming out of the shoot, it seemed pretty obvious that, like, we're going to tell this story about bison. We got that. We had some incredible wildlife encounters that for me personally were amazing. And as Sophie mentioned, like, almost all of the best footage we got on the trip, like, if you were to just like pan the camera slightly to the right, there were a whole bunch of guests just hanging out next to us as we were filming. It was so clear that we wanted to tell that story and have Sophie just walk us through what is the story of bison in Yellowstone. And she knocked it out of the park, and Andrew did an incredible job putting the finishing touches on what I think is a really great piece.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, and so could you explain then a little bit more about the strategy? I maybe there are some people listening right now that are filmmakers and understand that, but like, how do you capture that? What is your I don't know, playbook of how you do that? Like, you're like, okay, these are the kind of scenes that we need to get. Like, Sophie, I want you to do this interview. Could you just talk us a little bit more through that, if we could see behind the curtains a little bit of the process?
Sure. I mean, the process of making anything that sort of approaches a documentary film is a lot of just listening and being open in the field, because so much of the actual story is going to be constructed in post, as we say, like in the edit. We're going to get a whole bunch of footage. We got a whole bunch of footage over the course of 10 days on the shoot. And as we've mentioned a couple of times, like a 7-8 minute film, or like 3 hours of interview footage that we captured together. So it was a lot. We went really broad in the initial shoot here. And in the process in the field of trying to narrow that down and give some direction to what we're capturing, because we don't often get second chances to go back out into the field with Sophie or other guides and capture, like, oh, it'd be amazing if we had this particular thing. So we need to make sure that we get all of the component pieces that would be helpful in the edit while we're in the field, and having a good idea of what the story at a high level is going to be makes that really helpful. But when we work with guides and expedition leaders, and what we're trying to really, what the question that we're trying to answer at the core is, like, a lot of people, most children, I think, actually really love nature. They ask a young person, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, a lot of them are going to say, like, I want to be a marine biologist, or I want to be a zoologist, or there's this real, I think, natural tendency for young people to be drawn to nature and then think, like, how could I work in nature? But very few people actually get to do that, or at least pursue it to its end. And Sophie's one of those people. Almost nearly all of NatHab's expedition leaders are like that. And we're always really fascinated to ask the question of, like, most people want to do this but don't. Why did you do it, and how did you make it successful? Like, what's the drive? And for Sophie, it was just so apparent to me how her interest and passion, both for wildlife and for wild landscapes, but also for interpreting it, for sharing it with other people, it was just so evident. So when we were in the field for that week, it was a lot of frankly, I didn't have to try very hard. Sophie does a really great job on her own of just sort of, like, of what I just said, of, like, I want to capture the essence of this person who's in the wild and is really interested in sharing it and interpreting it. There's a whole bunch of footage I have of her pretending to wallow inside of like a space where a bison was wallowing. I think we had this one scene that ended up on the cutting room floor of, like, we came across, I can't remember if it was like a dead bug or some scat, and she's, like, examining it, and 2 strangers walk up, and she gives, like, a 5-minute lecture on just something and these people who were just random hikers in the park were totally enthralled. So it was not a huge challenge to capture Sophie's and her natural element. The challenge, of course, is to try and pair that with really great wildlife footage. And this shoot, we were very lucky that the bison showed up and were really charismatic and interesting. We had a number of other really interesting encounters and species. The guests on the trip, they were fantastic and enthusiastic, and they were like happy to listen and engage with Sophie and her co-guide Jake Richards on the trip, who was awesome as well. So yeah, this one, in terms of the shoots that we've done, was relatively easy and worked really well.
On the flip side of that, did anything go wrong by chance? Because I know a lot of things can go wrong on these. Did anything go wrong, or was there a moment that completely exceeded your expectations? So either spectrum or both.
Like I said, this was actually a pretty easy one. We didn't have any major issues that I recall, which definitely can happen. This is both working just in this kind of work, but also with wildlife, things can go off the rails a bit. The moment that Sophie mentioned, actually, where we were on the side of the road and we have this really incredible footage of bison sparring, that was both a total highlight, because I'd never seen, this was like the first real time I'd spent in Yellowstone as well. I went when I was a kid, but I was overjoyed to get to spend, a week and change with dedicated naturalists in this park, because I was like this, I was lapping it up. but I was entranced watching these bison spar. And then I didn't really notice that a number of bison had kind of like moved around us a little bit and were getting kind of close to the van. And I was outside with a tripod, like just really focused on filming. And Sophie or Jake had to like tap on the window and be like, "Hey, you're aware that there's bison like near you right now, right?" And I was like, "Oh, right, I gotta be safe. Don't get close to bison." So, but no, in general, it was a pretty smooth shoot, and yeah, just a total joy to get to spend some real dedicated time in the park because it's such a special place.
Ah, great. Well, thank you for taking us behind the camera in the field. Because, like I said, it's always so interesting to hear how these things come together, especially when we get to see the final product. But switching to the final product, there is a mastermind who's cutting all the pieces together and like giving us this final thing that we've seen. So, Andrew, it is your turn. You have been on Daily Dose before, but there's a good chance that people listening have not met you. So, could you give us a little bit more about your background and why you went into film editing?
Yeah, hey everyone. I'm Andrew, and I'm currently living in Madison, Wisconsin. Um, it has been warming up a little bit. We had a few weeks in the negative 10s, 20s, but glad to report we're back in the 30s. Yeah, I actually went to college here at UW-Madison as well, and went for communication arts with a focus in radio, TV, and film production. And obviously, I only went into that degree because I had a great passion for all of those things growing up. So I was kind of a kid that was glued to the TV most of the time. Thankfully, I grew up in a golden age of nature documentary with channels like Animal Planet, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, when it was more than just Pawn Stars and aliens, ancient aliens. So I got to watch some of the better nature documentaries and films, but I never really thought I would be in a position to be editing similar content. So my career path took me to NatHab by chance, and I could just recall all the endless hours and hours and hours I spent watching um, that kind of content. So yeah, I just really loved being behind a camera, but mostly I loved um, piecing together the footage to create a cohesive story. And I think growing up, I was a pretty strong writer and a storyteller in that sense. And it's just kind of a different way to be a writer is to be an editor. So yeah, that's one way to look at editing.
And that's great. So, for this particular project, when did you come into the whole video process? Because I know that we had talked about earlier, a rough cut. Not all of us know what a rough cut is. I'm still very new to film terms myself. So, what is the rough cut? And could you explain that? What needed to be done from then on to make what we saw today?
Yeah, thankfully, I'm not the only person editing Natural Habitat Adventures content. We're lucky to have some contract video editors that we work with, and Worth had a big part in creating the story for this video. So big thanks to Worth. So when I got the project at a rough cut stage, basically what a rough cut is you have the story mostly in place. We have all the Sophie interview footage rearranged and cut in a way where it tells a story from beginning to end. There's some music underneath as well, and some footage on top of it. And it's very kind of like just roughly slotted in, like, oh, she's talking about bison. Let's just throw some bison footage in here. Oh, Sophie's talking about guiding. There's some guest guiding. We'll just throw this in. So it was like just kind of like the skeleton of the video. It was the bones, and from there, basically the first thing you do when you get a rough cut as an editor, at least what I like to do, is make a more fine cut, and that is to really kind of perfect the pacing and make sure all the story elements are right in place and they're landing on not just a, oh, this makes sense level, but it also needs to touch on an emotional level. There needs to be some kind of why to everything you do. Every single second, every single frame really matters. So if Sophie's talking about just the feeling of being in this landscape, it's the perfect time to just kind of like show her in the landscape as you know, this dramatic shot and the wind blowing her hair, and like there's a lot of thought that goes into when and where you're placing these clips, when you're timing the different music transitions, and when we need to like try to pull out some sections that aren't as engaging, or maybe it feels like, oh, this is dragging on a bit. Let's cut it down so we get to the important stuff a little bit quicker. So kind of refining the story was very important. And then the other component too is some of the bison management story is relatively complex, and it's not something that we could just tell by just showing Worth's amazing footage of bison for 4.5 minutes straight. And so I had the idea of seeking out some art pieces illustrating what the landscape may have looked like with millions of bison roaming. And thankfully, there's some fantastic artists out there who put together the perfect visual aids for what Sophie was referring to in some of these cases. And there was one piece, you know, we've all seen the photo of just the thousands upon thousands of bison skulls stacked up, and we didn't want to kind of go that direction. Instead, there was a painting, and I believe it's called "Where the Millions Have Gone," and it's a very kind of like melancholy, very kind of like sad piece of art where, you know, we see the beautiful Yellowstone landscape in the background, but there's no live bison to be seen. There's just some bone remains laying around. So it's all about finding the right supplemental kind of visual aids to help some of these things, some of these concepts land on a more emotional level. So I also worked on some map animations so viewers could kind of get a sense of how big the greater Yellowstone area is and where the Lamar Valley is located in this area. And I also spent a lot of time on the audio design. So when Worth goes out and records this amazing slow motion footage, we can't really hear everything what's going on out there. So it was a lot of fun and a big challenge for me to put together the bison sparring sound design. You know, Sophie goes into great detail about the sounds and the grunting of the bison and the collisions, and it just felt weird that we couldn't really hear it. So I spent a lot of time gathering tons of audio assets and putting that together to really help those moments just pop off your screen, because really 50% of watching a video or a film is the listening component. It's the audio component. So I felt it was very important to give Yellowstone, to breathe the life into Yellowstone itself, that we get some ambient bird noises and the sounds of the geysers bubbling and the waterfall rushing by as well. So we really wanted to just make Yellowstone feel as vibrant and alive as it truly is, to do respect to the natural landscape.
Wow, yeah, I loved that you included those images. That actually probably surprised me the most, and the map animations as well. And to think that, I mean, video editor, but you're also a sound engineer, and then you're editing maps and you're, you know, inserting all this other stuff. Like, it's amazing when we start to understand what actually goes into one well-made 8-minute piece like this. This is why I'm so grateful to have all of you on to explain how much work this actually takes. And then from your perspective, Andrew, was anything particularly challenging to edit, or were there any scenes that got left on the cutting room floor that you're just really bummed couldn't have been left in, or anything?
Well, I think some of the challenge, truthfully, was we wanted to tell this bison story, but we also wanted to introduce Sophie and tell her story. And we also wanted to have Yellowstone as a landscape take a spotlight as well and focus on just the true feeling of being there. So the tricky part, and a lot of it I think came from kind of when Worth was more involved, but I also, you know, wanted to balance those as I was perfecting the story itself. But it's a unique video in a sense where like usually only one of those is going to really shine through, but it kind of felt in a sense that we kind of pulled off a video that allowed Sophie to have her moment, to have the bison conservation story to have its moment, and to also just help people understand and if they haven't been there, how crazy Yellowstone is, how beautiful it is. I do remember going there when I was pretty young as a kid and seeing some of those hot springs and whatnot. And I don't think I respected it enough because, you know, I was probably like 10 years old and I'd love to go again, but it also needed its time in the spotlight as well. So I think this video really touched on all three, but it was a challenge to get it to that point where it felt like it was a good balance of each.
Great. And before we move to the Q&A, so if anybody has any questions for Worth, Sophie, or Andrew, please go ahead and put them in the chat because I'm going to do that next. But while all of you are thinking of your questions, I'm going to ask you one question. And Sophie, I will start with you. What is your favorite memory from this film experience?
Oof. Well, I already mentioned those 3 bison all sparring at once, right? So that certainly stands out. Yeah, you know, the other thing that's coming to mind for me, there's this maybe 2-second or maybe half a second clip of a coyote trotting along on this side slope that features in the film somewhere. And that was just such a beautiful moment of like right place, right time, got the van positioned perfectly to have this close encounter with this animal that's abundant on the Yellowstone landscape and throughout the rest of North America. But it was just so special to have, that brief window, that glimpse into this animal's life amidst the sagebrush. So there's the one that's coming to mind right now.
Worth, your turn. What is your favorite memory from this?
In that same vein, I think right before we encountered that coyote, we were I'm gonna blank on some of the specific location names, Sophie, but we'd gone to try and capture some more footage of wolves in Yellowstone, which in the summer they're often like a bit of a ways off. And there's this one what's the name of the place I'm trying to think of, Sophie?
Maybe like the Slough Creek area.
Slough Creek, right. We drove over there, and there was a whole variety of folks with scopes there's this one population of wolves, or there were at the time, that you could see from this one road. And we rolled up, and a bunch of people were looking way off in the distance, and this one group of people were like focused on the ground right in front of them. And so if you like picked up on that immediately and was like, what's going on down there? And there was this badger that appears very briefly in the film, but it was just a really cool sighting. I'd never seen a badger in the wild, and we was not on our list of like things we might see. They're hard to find, but it was just this really fun, very Yellowstone moment of just like roll up on a group of people. They're focused on something. Like Sophie was paying attention to what the people were paying attention to, and that led us to see this really interesting species. And that was among all the things we've already talked through. That also is top of mind for me when I think about this shoot. It was a really cool experience.
Speaking of badgers, Andrew, what is your favorite memory from this experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I just kind of looking at my computer screen at home, so I can't say it was like the same as these two. But you know, I think some of my favorite shots from the film that you got, Worth, I can elaborate on that, and Sophie already brought it up, was the coyote running, because it's so nice because the coyotes in movement and the vans in movement, and it creates for a really a stunning shot. And I guess the other part too is putting together just the sequence of shots where at the beginning where Sophie's talking about the bison kind of the sparring, and trying to find the perfect shots for all of them. And when she says like their eyes bulging, and then I knew the exact shot that we had to use because Worth, you nailed it. You got the shot of the one just mad-eyed bison. So just trying to like piece together that sequence was really fun for me, to really like illustrate everything that Sophie was referring to.
Great. We do have a comment here also appreciating and enjoying the historic art pieces that you put into the film. So kudos to you. We have a lot more people commenting on that. So all of us enjoyed it. Well, great, everybody. We'll get to the Q&A portion. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and put it in the chat feature. And I will get through the ones through the rest of the duration of the time. We'll see how many we can get through. So Sophie, I would like to turn this to you. We are getting a lot of questions about supplemental feeding. What exactly does that mean in this context for bison?
Oh, great question. So yeah, I think the bison were kept in, or like there were like corrals and extra food. I don't actually know exactly what it was that was being provided to them, like at the time that the Lamar Buffalo Ranch was operating, just so that they would have that food source in addition to roaming through the valley. And so that came to a close. Bison population was left to range free, and then the numbers have just increased from there. But yeah, I might have to do some digging, and that's a good prompt for me to actually become more clear on exactly what it was that they were feeding the bison from like 1906 to 1950 in the Lamar Valley, because there is a lot of food out there for them already, right? I think it's just maybe a change in attitude and realizing that like, oh yeah, right, we don't need to provide food to these animals. They're able to get what they need from their natural environment.
On a similar note, this is an interesting question. One of our viewers here is asking, would it be possible or could it help with conflict if park rangers or park staff were feeding bison before they got to the conflict zone so that they weren't, like they wouldn't want to migrate out? Would that be a possible solution?
Fascinating. Yeah, so because the goal really is to let bison, go through their natural behaviors on the Yellowstone landscape within park boundaries now. I'm not sure that that's really been looked at as an alternative. I actually didn't flesh out like the entire kind of complex story of like what's going on at that park boundary. The northern boundary is where a lot of bison end up exiting the park in the wintertime, and they end up getting quarantined, tested for brucellosis. Some of them actually get slaughtered and shipped off to tribes as a source of meat. And then the ones that are brucellosis free get quarantined, and many of them are actually put through this long-term quarantine process to then be moved to conservation herds across Montana and beyond, actually. And the World Wildlife Fund is involved with and your conservation support, right? And travel dollars are helping to fund this program to restore bison to tribal lands across the West and restore herds there. So right now the policy more is to deal with bison on the end of where they exit the park, and then maintain that value of just letting them roam free and not restore any additional feeding program. Although I'm sure if food source were provided in the dead of winter and they didn't have to plow through all the snow anymore, they'd be eager for it. But the Buffalo Ranch is not serving as a Buffalo Ranch anymore. It's a field institute run by Yellowstone Forever, the nonprofit organization.
Yeah, very interesting question. Sometimes you got to think of all the kind of different solutions here. It's definitely a very complex management program and question.
Yeah. And the real conflict or, debate right now, I think there's lawsuits going on, is around what is that number of bison that are being managed. So like even with the current herd being about 5,300, I think the goal is to remove 1,000 bison from that herd in the Northern Range this year. And so, it'll depend on how severe the winter is, how many bison are, migrating out of the park currently, like what that will actually look like on the ground. But it's fascinating. It's kind of heartbreaking and complex, I guess is the word that I just keep on coming back to, trying to get to the heart of how to manage this. And it always comes down to what are our values for the landscape, and how do we want to manage that herd within park boundaries? What does it mean beyond?
And during that answer, you actually brought up the next topic that somebody wants to learn more about, and that is brucellosis. Could you describe a little bit further what this disease is and why it is catastrophic, like why cattle ranchers really want to make sure it doesn't enter their herd? But could you talk a little bit more about that? And
Yeah,
then also, just as a follow-up, they're also asking if it's safe to eat meat that has brucellosis. So we just want to talk about the whole life cycle of brucellosis. That would be great.
yeah. So yes, it is safe to eat meat that has brucellosis. That's why when the bison are tested positive, about half of the herd carries it. Those become meat animals. The damage for cattle owners or ranchers is that brucellosis, it's this bacterial disease that causes stillborn calves or aborted fetuses. So it just like destroys the ability of the herd to reproduce itself. And then it also really draws down milk production and affects the health of the animals. And so having it in your herd, it's highly contagious if you come into contact with basically like any like piece of like the placenta, like when a calf is born. I think that's largely how it's getting transferred, like any of that material from a bison fetus. But it can, yeah, it can spread quickly, and it's, yeah, and again, it's so interesting because we're managing for that extreme what if kind of scenario, knowing, at least as far as I know, there still hasn't been any confirmed case of bison transferring brucellosis to cattle. You might say that that's actually because, well, maybe there's not such a high risk, but you could also say it's, well, it's because we're doing such a good job of maintaining the quarantine, right? So it's probably some of both. But ironically, there is also brucellosis carried by elk, and there's a very different relationship with the elk population. Elk are allowed to roam free. There's no quarantine zone for the elk herd, and there have been confirmed cases of elk actually carrying brucellosis and transferring it to cattle too. So yeah, complexity, right? We're back to complexity.
Very complex. And since we are nearing the end, the last question, and I also am going to lob this to all of you, and of course, Sophie, we will start with you. What do you want travelers to take away from this film?
Hmm. You know, if it makes you want to step out your door and go spend some time outside, taking in nature right at your doorstep, or going to a place like Yellowstone, I think to me that's the best impact that it could have. Just feeling more inspired to continue exploring, continue seeking out these kinds of experiences. And I certainly hope that some of you will feel inspired to visit Yellowstone in the summertime. It's an incredible place.
Worth, what about you?
I'll absolutely echo what Sophie mentioned. If it inspires folks to get outside and go to Yellowstone specifically, like heck yeah. I also think that an interesting part of this story is how it explores the complex relationship between humanity and wildlife species in this way, and how we often remove ourselves from that story, and how in this story we are very much a part of it, and we're not we're not removed from really any wildlife story. I think it's important to remember our role in so much of wildlife conservation, and how we are ourselves a part of wildlife in general. So I think that's a great message to reflect on after watching this piece.
Oh, could not agree more. And Andrew, what about you?
I couldn't have said it any better than Sophie and Worth. But if there's one other thing that you should take away out of this video is that there's many more videos like this in the works and on the way. So please, if you haven't, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you get notified like exactly when those go out.
Absolutely. And okay, so Sophie, Worth, and Andrew, this was amazing. Thank you all for taking the time to, one, sit down with me and all of us today, but also to make that beautiful film that taught us so much in 8 minutes. How did you pack all that 8 minutes? It was amazing. So thank you all again. I love to say that. Great. And I would like to thank everybody who tuned in. If you're interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, give us a call at 800-543-8917 or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are more than happy to help you. Join us tomorrow for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and the replay will be available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody.